So Congressman, you're showing up twice in my attendee or my panelists, which means two boxes are showing up. So I'm going to remove the box, one of these boxes. Can you unmute yourself real quick, please?
Okay, yeah, sure. I don't know why I show up twice, but is the other one Zach?
It could potentially, if you forward the email to, or if Tanya forwarded it to anyone else, they can hit the same link and it will technically log them in as him, because that's the name I put for the panelists. So if it is someone else, we could just simply change the name under panelists. If you hover over them, you'll see the more option, I think, Chris.
Right.
Zach, is that you?
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, we can.
Okay, so yeah, that's me. I can log out of this and try and get in another way if that.
Oh, no, you're fine. So you're the one showing. Zach, can you talk again, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Chandris, can you rename him?
I can't, but Chris, you should be able to as the host, or you can.
Oh, I think I can rename myself.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Or you can have him log out.
Oh,
Chris,
there he is.
have him log in just as an attendee and give him the privilege.
Yeah, I can just pop out and log in as attendee. I just clicked the link. I didn't realize it was logging me in.
Zach, you show up now as Zach Capers. You changed your name.
Yeah, I changed my name, but I'll just pop out and log in as an attendee.
Okay, you had a chance to be anybody you wanted to be there.
Meanwhile, we've got attendees joining. So to everybody out there, welcome. We're just spending these last couple minutes fine-tuning our tech piece. Zach Kafritz, member of the Congressman's legislative team, just joined us. And so we will start in earnest in just a couple of minutes and let a few more people jump on the call. So Chandris, we may have lost Zach there.
Okay, yeah, I think he logged off to log back in as just an attendee. So as soon as he comes through as an attendee, then we can just give him the privileges.
Okay.
And then you can just leave me as is because my video's off. So Ken says he can only see you and Don. Okay, yeah.
Good morning, everyone. We're once again, we're letting a few more people jump onto the call. We'll get started shortly. All right, so we are at 9 o'clock. So we will go ahead and get started. We'll have more people joining us in the next couple of minutes. But in the meantime, wanted to welcome everyone to this webinar of the Democratic Business Council of Northern Virginia. Like so many groups around, well, around the country and around the world, we have had to postpone for the time being our in-person event programs. But we are very pleased to have a great friend of DemBiz, Congressman Don Beyer, with us this morning to answer your questions about the stimulus, coronavirus and the goings on Capitol Hill. If you're not familiar with DemBiz, we are a networking organization at the intersection of business and progressive politics. You can learn more about us and become a member at dembiz.org. That's DEMBIZ.org. And we definitely would encourage you to join us there and also to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And just to give you a brief overview of how this will go this morning. So the Congressman has a hard stop at about 9:50 for a staff call. So we're going to try and get to as much as we can between now and then. I will ask him a few questions, business related, and then open it up. If you have questions for the Congressman, you can type them into the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. And I will be selecting some of those as we run through and forwarding those on to the Congressman to answer as we go along. So also want to, if you hear a voice kind of from the behind the scenes, that is most likely Zach Kafritz, who will be joining us shortly. He is the Congressman's legislative director. And without further ado, might as well get started. So I guess we'll do a quick mic check because we've been going on and off. So Congressman, if you could just give me a quick mic check, that would be great.
Chris, I am here.
All right, fantastic. All right, so we can probably do the shorter introduction here. Since 2015, Congressman Don Beyer has represented Virginia's 8th Congressional District and has done a fantastic job, as we all know. Also, of course, a very successful businessman in his own right. So thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris, very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have a 35-year history with the various iterations of the DemBiz Council, so it's fun to see it going stronger than ever. Thank you for your leadership.
Fantastic. So we'll get into the stimulus and all that in a second, but you were one of the first to self-quarantine, which you did a few weeks ago. Just want to confirm, are you all good on the health front?
We've always been fine. We self-quarantined. It was actually sort of a half quarantine because they're supposed to last 14 days, and we didn't go in till day 10. So
Okay.
The first 9 days of quarantine, we were busy trying to infect everybody else.
We can round up.
That's only because we didn't know that we've been exposed.
Right.
But
Okay.
it was good practice, though, because we've essentially stayed in this self-quarantine ever since with as little contact with other human beings as possible.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for your leadership on that, because that's what that was walking the walk. So we appreciate that. So let's get right into it. Open-ended question to start off with. Where are we at? What is your view of what's going on at this moment, both on Capitol Hill, in the U.S., in the world?
A short, easy question.
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of really good things going on, and there's a lot of confusion and blockades. And let me start. The Capitol Hill perspective has been twofold. Number one is to do everything we can on the health side first, preserving lives, preserving the Americans' health, slowing the spread of the virus. And then part two is thinking and acting quickly, deeply on the economic recovery, trying to minimize the economic impact on people's lives. So on the healthcare side, to begin with, it looks like we're doing a pretty good job flattening the curve. There are all kinds of different websites you can go to. The one that I find most trustworthy has a COVID-19 in its title, but it points out that at this point, it looks like that the U.S. peak for new cases and for resources should be in about 12 days, April 15th, and that the peak death rate should be the next day, April 16th. And that they're now anticipating, there's a broad range, but the center of the range is 93,000 U.S. deaths. We're now, we crossed the million mark last night in terms of international cases. 245,442 this morning U.S. One of the things that's been disturbing is the creeping up. A week ago, our death rate was 1%. It's 2.5% right now. It seems to be creeping up a tenth or two every single day. That's the danger. As you look at Italy, South Korea, China, Spain, you get death rates from 5 to 10%. Italy's at 11%. The most disturbing healthcare statistic out there is the so-called cases that have an outcome. And the outcomes are twofold. Either they recovered or they died. And right now, of those with an outcome, 20% have died. Now,
Wow.
you can say, well, that 20% is artificially high because many cases aren't counted. Either they never reported themselves or they were asymptomatic. So in the car business, when we think a number is too optimistic, we cut it in half, and then we cut it in half again. But it's still 5%, which is 50 times what it is for the flu. Pretty bad stuff. Virginia, because we've been so successful flattening the curve, the peak is not likely to come until May 20th. By the way, that's similar to what the DC Department of Health and Maryland Department of Health also think for their states. So we are, a month behind most of the rest of the country, but with a much, much lower anticipated death rate. Again, the middle range for the Virginia deaths was 3,152. On the economic side, and by the way, there's, I'm sure all of you are searching the web day in and day out about using the serum from people that have been sick to do the antibodies, the antibody test. Abbott Laboratories is probably the most exciting thing the last couple of days, to be able to get a positive coronavirus test in 5 minutes and a negative test in 13 minutes. One of the things that we see in the early morning statistics today is that because we're testing more, we're also finding more. And so our numbers are going to go up quickly in the next couple of days as the testing keeps improving. Not to be concerned about it. On the economic side, which is far more relevant, we're now looking at 10 to 12% unemployment rate for the second quarter. It looks like the CBO's report last night was that we'll have a 7% drop in GDP in the second quarter, which is not annualized. That's 28% annualized. So this is the no economist that we've talked to has ever seen a drop as precipitous as this. And of course, you saw 6.6 million for unemployment insurance last week, which was double the 3.3 the week before, which was 5 times the largest ever, the 600,000 we had during the Great Recession. So it's just, we've never been here before, which is just fascinating. I won't take you all the way through the CARES Act. There's some great summaries online, but the biggest 3 pieces of that are for small and medium-sized businesses. So number 1, there's the Paycheck Protection Plan. We were on the call with the bankers last night, Jennifer Wexton, Jerry Connolly, and I, who described that today will be the craziest day in U.S. banking history.
Wow.
Because
that's a statement.
An incredible number of businesses will be showing up to get their payment protection plan loan, and no one's ready for it. The SBA didn't even come out with their initial guidance till after dinner last night. So the banks were going to stay up all night reading the guidance. And there are, we can talk about it later, but there are a lot of problems that were not anticipated when we wrote the bill, but that's normal and we'll have to fix them.
So what did you want in the bill and versus what we actually got? And what is your best guess as to how it will help businesses on the ground?
It was pretty close. We were working with, I'm through an accident of history, I'm the vice chair of the Joint Economic Committee, and we'll chair it next year as long as I win and we keep the House. So we were working with Glenn Hubbard and Michael Strain, both out of AEI. And Glenn had been head of the Council of Economic Advisors for George Bush. And there's a very simple plan, which is that we have this government enforced shutdown and massive numbers of people losing their jobs right away, is that this economy will recover much more quickly if they didn't lose their jobs. If we basically paid the businesses to keep people back on payroll. And that's what the Paycheck Protection Plan is. Any business less than 500 people can borrow basically 10 weeks of payroll and use it to pay their people and pay rent and mortgage and insurance, the like, healthcare premiums. And then as long as they maintain their payroll, the government will forgive 100% of it. So basically just an enormous government investment in keeping your payroll on board. My brother bought me out back on October 1st, so I no longer own the dealerships, but I've been talking to him every day because he's got 330 employees that he's trying to keep employed, and they will use the PPP loans to do that. The reason it's so complicated today is because all of the crossed T's and dotted I's are not yet understood.
Right. Well, and as I mentioned to you before, yesterday I had a conversation with Rob Krupika, who owns the Sugar Shack which have been converted to Elizabeth's Counter restaurants in Alexandria and beyond. And we were talking, kind of getting in the weeds on his current issues, which are staffing, debt, and the difficulty in coming back. So these businesses, if they go out of business, face tremendous challenges getting back, even just to ground zero, to get going again, because they've probably depleted their capital and they might be starting over again with a mountain of debt. So he was saying basically that a second stimulus would probably be required to inject money to those small businesses so that they could get going again. Is it your sense that that's what's needed, and could that happen?
Chris, it's very clear that what we did in the CARES package last Friday was a great start, but not enough. What the economists I've talked to this week suggest, we put $349 billion in the Payment Protection Act, that we're actually going to need more like $1 trillion, 3 times what we've actually put in. That we're working on coronavirus package number 4 and even number 5 right now. I'm thinking that's where we will put this more money in. The banks, again, anticipate, one of their concerns last night was they're going to run out of money to lend right away, that the whole liquidity in the banking system is going to have to be significantly pumped up to meet the needs of these small businesses. We also think that 8 weeks is probably not enough. Right. Just look at our Northern Virginia businesses. They started around March 10th, just shut down. And if we're not, Governor Northam's stay-at-home order is till June 10th, and most of these curves don't flatten until July 1st, that's 4 months. And 8 weeks doesn't cover 4 months, especially when you look at the average cash on hand of a small business.
Okay. I'm going to start forwarding you some of these questions from the people that are joining us online. One is about healthcare, the looming healthcare crisis that could come out of, or is very likely to come out of this financial crisis. Presumably that means not only the direct impact of coronavirus, but people not being able to enroll to get healthcare, and the spillover challenges from the economic issues that we're going to be facing. What do you say to that?
Yeah, one of the principles, we've articulated 3 major principles for the next package, and one of them is healthcare affordability. We established in the second package that the testing would be free, and then paid for by Medicare and Medicaid in the third package. What we haven't done yet, we've done it in the House, it's been aspirational, is that all healthcare related to coronavirus would also be free. Reimbursed by either your insurance company or by the federal government. We still have to put that into law, but that's coming. It has to come. Obviously, the downside is if people don't get tested or they don't get care because they can't afford it, they become carriers for the rest of us.
Right.
But then you also have 3.5 million people lost their insurance already. So one of the reasons why the Payment Protection Plan specifically says you can pay health insurance premiums with that is we want to get people back on board and pay for it. And the awful Trump administration decision not to open the open enrollment period for Affordable Care Act is just immoral. And
Right.
We're fighting that hard. They've reversed themselves on a bunch of different things. We are hoping and praying they will reverse themselves on this too.
Okay. So Catherine, thank you for that question. Wanted to jump into Jane's question about nonprofits and how they will be recipients or non-recipients of these benefits that are coming forward.
So Jane, we had a conference call the other night with 360 some nonprofits in Northern Virginia. And the good news is they are treated exactly as if they were a small business. So they can go make, by showing their payroll for the first quarter of 2020 or their tax return for 2019, they can go borrow 250% of their average monthly payroll and use it to pay rent, debt, insurance, and of course payroll, and they can have it up to 100% forgiven. So nonprofits should be held relatively harmless. The one thing that the state federal government can't do is replace the donation grant income stream that comes into nonprofits. Hopefully that will still be there. By the way, there was one interesting tweak. That in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the one that gave $2.1 trillion to the top 1%.
Yes.
That one.
Yeah, that one.
In doubling the standard
Unfortunately,
deduction,
I do remember that one.
yeah. In doubling the standard deduction, they took away the deductibility of many people's charitable deductions. So we put a $300 on top of the deduction thing on your next tax return just for charitable. So we're hoping that will make it a little easier for an awful lot of people to give.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Your demographic and your fan base is very wide. We're gonna go to fourth grader at Churchill Elementary, Emory, who has a question. Do you think kids will go back to school in the fall?
Emory, I do think so. I think they'll probably be ready to go back. The parents will be ready to have you go back on July 1st, but probably the day after Labor Day, or maybe now before Labor Day. Yes. And Emory, I hope you're studying hard, but one of the things that this points out is that the divide we have between the affluent and the people on lower incomes, the people with fast broadband and the people with no broadband are very slow, is really becoming obvious. My grandkids go to Maury Elementary in Alexandria, and so they're homeschooled, but they each have their iPad and mom and dad, and they're going to do fine. But there are kids in Southwest Virginia, Southside Virginia, without computers, with parents who maybe only went to high school, and those kids could really lose a lot by missing these 3 months of school.
Right. Let's turn to John's question. Who should local small business owners contact for guidance in getting their initial $10,000?
That's going to come through the SBA, which is to say it's going to come through the bank. So right now, the SBA banks that are 7A qualified, there's a list on the SBA website. Off the top of my head, it includes Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Eagle Bank, United Bank. And we've encouraged, and a number of the credit unions, so not just banks. And we've encouraged banks that are not part of the 7A program to go request it. The SBA is waiving most of the due diligence. They want to sign people up right away. So for example, we've been using Burke and Herbert, little community bank in Alexandria. That's almost as old as the nation. And I don't think they're 7A bank, but we want them to be because we already have that relationship with them.
Right. Okay. Cannon is asking, will there be any relief in tax rates for lower income Americans?
So far, none at all. The one thing that they haven't really touched in this is tax rates. There is, although I promise you, we continue to fight for a 50% increase in the earned income tax credit, or even a doubling. We could do that on the House side. The Senate has held us up all year long because they don't want it to be refundable, which is essential to help the people that are below the poverty level or near the poverty level and working full time. What there has been, though, is the delay of taxes. So in Virginia, you don't have to file your tax return until November 1st, your state tax return, although whatever taxes are due have been postponed a month from May 1st to June 1st. And the federal from April 15th to July 15th. And the employers have a number of tax incentives, including the net loss backward turn. Right now, whatever you lose in 2020, you can apply to the profits you made going all the way back 5 years, which will be helpful for a lot of people from a cash flow perspective. And if you don't take advantage of the payment protection plan, there is an up to $10,000 tax credit, payroll tax credit per person that you can take against your federal taxes.
Okay.
So every business will have to decide what's best for them.
Okay. Thank you. Eddie's asking about the safety of pension plans.
With the exception of that's a complicated question. There's nothing in the legislation that I'm aware of that bolsters the pension plans per se. On the House side, we have already passed the Butch-Lewis plan, which greatly strengthened the pensions that were coming out of our manufacturing base, largely in the Midwest. And we were really fighting hard to get that included in Package 2 and Package 3. We're unsuccessful in the Senate either time. But we do realize that there's so many pension plans that are underfunded, especially relative to the benefits that were promised, and that this crisis is only going to make that worse. So it wouldn't surprise me that we end up really investing some money in that in these next two iterations.
Okay.
Which leads to Chris to a quick aside, which is that, we just blew another $2 trillion hole in the budget with the CARES plan, and we'll do more. And even though I very much consider myself a fiscal hawk in the Virginia tradition, we pay for what we get.
Right.
There's very few people on Capitol Hill, Democrat or Republican, want to sacrifice either our health or our economy for short-term fiscal responsibility. Recognize we have to come back and do something about this in the middle run and long run.
Yeah, and as long as we're talking about that, let's talk about the tone that you saw on Capitol Hill during these negotiations. Was it more? It seemed more cooperative than what we're used to, for sure. But is there some good that can come out of this long term? And is there anything that can you give a little color on what that was like behind the scenes that maybe people aren't aware of?
Yeah, I wasn't. This last bill was largely done in the Senate. Coronavirus Package 2 we did in the House, and the Senate, it sort of depends on whose perspective you have to feel like the bill's been shoved down your throat.
Right.
But it's more fun to write it than to accept the other side's version of it. But in the House, it's been actually pretty friendly. I went up Friday morning for the vote. There were, I figured since I live closer than anybody on Capitol Hill, I really had an obligation to show up, even though I'm almost 70. And it was really fun to be on the House floor for those 4 hours. It was supposed to be a 2-hour debate, but we dragged it out to be 4 hours to make sure there were enough people to get there to have a quorum to overcome Thomas Massey's one person holding up the entire package.
There's always that guy, right?
Yeah. I would not bet money on Thomas in his primary coming up in Kentucky.
Well,
Yeah.
there you go. All right. So we're bouncing around a little bit. Maria's question is, how is Virginia doing with getting testing for COVID-19, as a lot of people have claimed that they've been turned away?
Yeah, that's the reality. I don't think Virginia's much worse than any other state. In the conversation with Governor Northam last night and his team, he's got a great team put together. Dr. Carey, who's head of the health department, Brian Moran, our Northern Virginia guy who's head of public safety, and a lot of other good people. They're struggling in every respect with catching up with unemployment claims. There's a desperate shortage of N95 masks, and we're working to overcome the bed shortage. Just Virginia's like everywhere else. We very frustrated about the inability to pull things out of the national stockpile and the lack of national planning.
What about a vaccine?
So it's all coming, but it's not coming nearly fast enough for us.
Sure. What about a vaccine? We're getting questions about that too.
Yeah, I thought Dr. Fauci's comments yesterday were encouraging that there is a promising vaccine that they're on the third part of stage 1, which is they've given small and medium doses to people without ill effects. Yesterday, they started giving the big doses to people to see what happened. Then they move on to sections 2 and 3, which is does the vaccine work? But he still said, as of yesterday, it'll be 12 to 18 months before we get it. We're likely to get the antibody tests way before we get the vaccine, which means when Chris and Chandris both test positive for antibodies, you will be safe to go out into the community and go back to work, interact without fear of infecting other people. As Dr. Fauci says, virtually every virus confers lifelong immunity to that specific virus. The problem is when there's mutations in the virus, and there's a variety of evidence, but most of it seems to suggest that this one is a slow mutator rather than, say, the common cold, which mutates overnight. Okay.
So anybody that is on Facebook or any kind of social media has seen a lot of claims back and forth about what was in place during the Obama administration and then what was dismantled or not dismantled during the Trump administration. Being on the inside, what is your objective view of what existed when Trump took office and what he has dismantled that would have been very helpful for this?
I don't think it's fair to blame this entire thing on Donald Trump, because we have known for years. I mean, every couple of years, the New Yorker will have a 30-page article on the next pandemic. The Atlantic article in The Next Pandemic's been out for a while. You may have seen that Lawrence Wright's got a new book coming out this year that he wrote last year on a pandemic and what happens when you had a president that wasn't paying attention. Mm-hmm. And he didn't make it up out of his imagination. He just talked to epidemiologists and infectious disease people and researched it. So many administrations will carry some blame for this. However, 3.5 years ago, when we had an administration come in that decided that it hated science and that facts weren't facts, and you could no longer mention climate change, and they disemboweled the EPA, and et cetera, not a good thing. Mm-hmm. And there's some controversy around eliminating the pandemic section of the National Security Council, and said they were streamlining, but clearly they were way underprepared. But the worst part is when this hit on January 20th, we had a president that said, it's not real, it's a hoax, impeachment in Russia didn't work, so maybe this will get rid of it. This is our Democrats' next attempt. Right. And all the things, the iterations that came after that, put us 2 months behind the rest of the world in trying to get ready for this.
Okay. So let's bring it back home again. Northern Virginia, what are you hearing from business owners specifically, and do any individual stories stand out to you so far?
Anxiety is probably the biggest single one, Chris. Just talking about my own family, and I've heard this story so many times. Businesses that have been around 10, 20, 40 years suddenly see this existential death threat before them, that if their business just goes away for 4 months, what happens to their employees? Do they scatter to the wind? What happens to that rainy day fund that they spent years building up? I talked to one group of restaurateurs who said that 70% of the restaurants that close won't ever reopen. Mm-hmm. They may reopen with different ownership and a different name and a different menu, but that owner, that restaurateur may not make it again. So this sense of existential dread is probably the most important thing. On the other hand, and the good side, this is once again an incredible occasion for decency, for kindness, that so many people are going out of their way to help others. And I think that's really to be treasured. And in the long run, Chris, I'm fascinated to see what are the cultural changes that emerge from this, both positive and negative, hoping that there are many more positive cultural changes.
What do you expect from that?
Well, I'm hoping that people have learned to read again. That there's all kinds of, you mentioned social media and the internet. One of the good things is, my God, there's been an explosion of creativity on the internet. Yes. People are bored and home. So the whole notion, one of the funniest things is the couple who discovers that who they each are again, and that they're actually in love. Yeah.
Yeah. And that somebody else lives in the house.
Yeah. I should have talked to her before.
Right. Is it your sense that the Fed's actions are helping or could help? You're a lifelong business guy. Would that have impacted your decisions on a day-to-day basis?
Oh yeah, I think Jay Powell has been terrific. And first of all, he's been terrific putting up with all the president's slights and insults and depredations and the like, and standing strong. But one of his conversations with Nancy Pelosi, he encouraged her a week or so ago to think big, and they are too. I mean, I think he is determined to make sure that whatever use monetary policy can be here, they'll do it. And I think that the banks take great comfort in that too.
Okay.
And having interest rates near zero certainly makes it a lot easier than, say, 1979, 1980, when they were up at 12%. And how do you possibly go forward with that?
Right. Okay.
You probably saw the Treasury said last night, Mnuchin, that the interest rate for these PPP loans is 1%, which is, I'll tell you, as a 45-year business person, I like 1%, right? Especially if it's going to be forgiven.
Right. Exactly. All right. We got a question from Carlos about potential fraud in the disbursements. I know that Nancy Pelosi is setting up an oversight committee. What are your concerns there, and what's being done to alleviate that?
Well, Carlos, I think you're right on the button. And all you have to do is look at Vietnam or World War II or even defense procurements today, and you see too much fraud. I'm really glad that Nancy stood up this special oversight committee, and I'm hoping that they staff it with the best and brightest, because they're going to have to do that. You know, we have taken a lot of over the transom offers for personal protective equipment and sent them off to Governor Northam's coordinator and to NIH and into the hospitals, Stephen Jones at Inova, Jim Cole at Virginia Health Center. And what we get back is fraud. You know, send us the $3 million, and then after we cash your check, maybe we'll send you the PPE. It's a mess.
Yeah.
And one of the things we're really have to guard against, in fact, the conversation with the bankers last night, they were particularly worried about the businesses that came in for the payment protection plan, that where all the documentation was fraudulent. And so they get the loan and then disappear. Yeah.
Wow, that's scary. You know, that's one of the challenges with something being pushed through by necessity this quickly and this broadly, is that it's a very difficult thing to corral. And to attack kind of surgically on this scale. Another question, Virginia has so many military service members deployed around the world. Is DOD taking measures to protect them at home and abroad?
Yes, they are. And I can't tell you I don't have any metric for how aggressive they are. My chief of staff, Tanya Bradsher, is retired Army colonel. So and her husband's retired Army colonel. She's on the phone all day long with the military side of it, trying to make sure that that's working well. One of my questions for Governor Northam last night was, how are we using Fort Belvoir, Fort Myer in this? Because Belvoir's got a wonderful hospital. And he said that they're working really closely together just to make sure that the overflow stuff works well. I am a little concerned. I haven't gotten deep into the story of the commander of the Roosevelt that was relieved of his duty yesterday. Mm-hmm. I want to believe that he wasn't relieved of his duty because he did the right thing in terms of taking care of his people. But it's certainly, the first glance, it's a pretty ugly story.
Right. Okay. Shifting gears a little bit here. Oh, by the way, we have a presidential election this year, and we are, the Democratic side is effectively down to Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. How do you see that playing out in light of the current situation in terms of primaries being able to happen, a general election being able to happen? How do we handle that?
Yeah, we all adapt day by day and we learn new things. But at this point, a Milwaukee convention in August looks pretty prominent. The Olympics are canceled, postponed for a year, so we're not going to compete with them. I think that would go off pretty well. I personally wish Bernie would get out right now. I don't think he's helping the process or the healing or the unifying thing at all. He has there's no path for him to win other than something, a meteor falling on Joe Biden's head. And even then, there's probably not a path. I think you'd have the draft Andrew Cuomo movement would kick in instantly. And then November, we should be well past all this. We have to hope and pray there's not a second spike, a second curve in the coronavirus. One of the things that we got really close on in CV3 was vote at home, and pushed by looking at the fact that Colorado, Washington State, Oregon, California, in many respects, that wherever you've done that, you've had significant improvement in voter turnout. Mm-hmm. I was on a call with Charlie Cook late last night, who said that he would expect extraordinarily high turnout from both Democratic and Republican bases in November, coronavirus notwithstanding. Now, the primaries on the other states going forward, what happens to Ohio and Kentucky, and I don't know. The governors will sort those out sort of one by one. So similarly, there's my primary opponent. I'm not sure whether they will do it by caucus or convention, but there are a couple of Republicans who have filed in the 8th district. I don't know their names yet. I'm waiting to see who they nominate.
Okay. So let's game this out and do a little bit of timeline for the next, say, few weeks, next couple of months. what are you expecting in the short term in terms of deployment of the stimulus funds, if you will, and then the virus itself and stay-at-home orders and the evolution of that? Where do you see us, call it 3 weeks from now, and then maybe a couple of months from now?
Well, I think that there's so many, I won't bore you going through the whole CARES package, but there's, $147 billion for state and local governments, and we'll get our fair share of that. Fairfax is the only jurisdiction in Virginia that will allow it to be applied directly to the federal government for their share because they're larger than 500,000. There's a ton of money for hospitals, like $150 billion, including community health centers. Then we have the $1,200 checks to everybody that hopefully you'll be able to get yours direct deposit from the Social Security Administration or the IRS, because it looks like you could wait maybe a couple of months to get the check signed by Donald Trump. And then the payment protection plan. And so there's, as I say, there's $2 trillion leveraged into about $6 trillion that's going to be coming out just out of this last package. And that will make a difference. Pantheon chief economist, one of the pieces that I read late last night, suggested that third quarter growth will be 20%.
Wow.
And that's one of the really interesting things. We've been talking to as many Nobel Prize winning economists as we can line up all week long and for the indefinite future. And one of the big issues is, will we have that V-shaped, we have a V-shaped down, will we have the V-shaped back up?
Sure.
Unlike a normal recession where businesses have just been pounded, you have people itching to go outside, itching to buy, businesses itching to get back in, employees who want to go back to work. Or will we have the long, slow recovery like we had after 2008, 2009, where it took basically 4 or 5 years to get back to where we were? It would be terrible if we had to wait 5 years to get back to a 29,000 stock market or 3.5% unemployment.
Well,
so
I think
all of our packages are going to be trying to figure out how do we make it grow an awful lot faster. Which then also means, in terms of your really good question about when can you start going outside again, the faster we get the antibody tests, the more people can be let out. And that peak of the curve, and which is now May 20th in Virginia and June 10th, those still look like pretty plausible numbers for this mid-Atlantic area.
Yeah, I think so much of it depends on how many of these businesses can hold on through this and what kind of shape they're in. Obviously, if people want to go out to restaurants or go to their favorite local retailers, they have to be available. And speaking of that, how are you, what are you hearing about landlords working with tenants and lenders working with landlords?
Yes. Yes.
You are hearing that.
Yes. There's an awful lot of that. I just look at our own thing. We've had Bank of America say no principal payments for the next 3 months, which is helpful. And we've had tenants say, hey, we need a little reduction to get through this. We're free for a couple of months and we'll extend the lease 3 months or 6 months to make it up for it. I think everybody's going to be adapting. A lot of the landlords I talked to, I've been encouraging to make sure their tenants take advantage of the PPP plan or the disaster loan from the SBA so that they can pay at least some of the rent. But it's inevitable that every one of us is going to take a haircut of some kind to get through this. And hopefully we, like being on a fast, we come out of it leaner, stronger, hungrier than we were before.
Well, and again, I mentioned my interview with Rob Krupika yesterday. He was saying that his employees will be much better rounded in terms of their skill sets because everybody's having to kind of be a jack of all trades and learn different aspects of businesses, which in the long run is helpful for the businesses themselves as well as for the individual employees. So that is some kind of silver lining as long as we can keep this moving forward.
And it's certainly been an explosion of Skype and Zoom and all the other different ways. I'm glad I don't own an office building right now because there'll be an awful lot of people that choose not to return to the traditional office setting after they discover it. And by the way, happiest people in America right now are the dogs.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there are plenty of memes going around about how useless, if you will, a lot of those meetings actually are, as it turns out. So at the office. So one last question. What is the status of masks that are going to New York City? I've heard that they're being made available to companies to resell overseas even, rather than giving directly to hospitals.
Yeah, I don't know. There are so many different stories out there. Some of them are real, some of them are urban myths. I know based on our input coming in, email and telephone, a lot of upset doctors and nurses in Northern Virginia and home healthcare workers who can't get the masks. Right now, it seems the hospitals are using the CDC guidance on mask usage, which is pretty spare or stingy. You know, here's your mask for the week and
Right.
wash it every night, where they were used to using a mask with every different patient or every different hour. This is one of those deals, like all of this, hopefully 30 days from now, 60 days from now, we will have gotten our act together and solved most of this stuff. But in the short run, there are critical shortages everywhere.
Okay.
It just is what it is. My daughter sewed a couple of masks, but they're good for walking around the neighborhood. They're not good for intubating somebody.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I know that you've got some meetings coming up at 10 o'clock, so we're probably going to wrap it up here. Wanted to remind people that DemBiz is interviewing folks on the ground and posting those to our Facebook page and other social media. So keep an eye out for that. Once again, invite you to join us at dembiz.org and become a member. We'll get back to our regularly scheduled programming soon, hopefully. And of course, we'll invite the Congressman to come speak again, if not do another webinar before then, because this has been super informative. So Congressman Beyer, I want to give you the last word. You're going to work or you're working to help improve the situation. What are your next steps on the job, and what do you say to people out there as they get ready to start their day today?
I guess three things, Chris. Number one is the next package will continue to be better. We're going to work on national recovery. We're working on healthcare affordability, and we're going to do an awful lot on sort of automatic stabilizers, thinking long-term about how do you have a strong government. We're also paying the price of we get so frustrated that we can't process unemployment claims in time, or the SBA guidance comes late. In 1950, we had 5 government employees for every 100 in the workforce. Today, we have 2 for every 100 in the workforce. And then we're surprised that somehow they can't keep up. Mm-hmm. So I think we're surrounded by all these people on the other side whose values are less government, no government. And at a time like this, we see how incredibly important it is. So my one advice is, in any time there's a crisis, there's also lots of opportunity. Yes. And I think the most successful business people will be the ones who are saying, how do I, in an ethical, honest way, how do I use this as a growth opportunity for market share, for getting the best people, for coming back stronger than ever, and just staying cheerful. Most of us are still fed and we're scared, but we're going to get through this.
Great points all. And DemBiz, one of our main messages throughout our history has been that Democrats are better for business. And a lot of it has to do with prudent public investment and making the kinds of decisions that stabilize or create a stable business environment. Because as you're referencing, slashing all regulations and all taxes is not a recipe for growth or being able to deal with these types of situations when they come up unexpectedly.
Chris, thank you very much. It's been an honor and a pleasure to be with you guys today.
Thanks so much, Congressman Beyer, and thanks to everyone at home joining us. We'll be doing these on a fairly regular basis, so watch out for your email inboxes, that is, and follow us on social media, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.